Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Kelly. I'm the director of the Center for Science, Technology, and Public Policy here at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and we're very pleased to have this public forum with Senator Al Franken and a distinguished panel of presenters, all on the topic of renewable energy and jobs and how we can tell that story about what Minnesota is doing in Washington, D.C. Just a couple logistical issues. We are going to have time, I hope, for questions from the audience, but we'd like you to put those on the cards that you've received. And after the Senator's speech, we'll have people in the aisles collecting those. And I also wanted to note that since we have many people from the university community here, students who might or might not have had Pell Grants or alumni, and many researchers who've been the beneficiaries of federal research, it's a good opportunity for the university community to thank Senator Franken for his and for the U.S. Senate's support of Pell Grants and research funding in the recent conversation over determining the 2011 budget. So, Senator, thank you very much. Senator Franken fits into the category of a person who is well known to all of you and for whom an introduction may be a tad superfluous, but I'll take a shot anyway. I first met him when I was in high school, and he demonstrated his creativity and good judgment early because the creativity part was that he and some of his classmates produced an acid rock version of Alice in Wonderland in high school. And the good judgment was that they cast me in the role of the executioner, which was a non-speaking role. So he went, we also were on the same wrestling team for a while. And he, as you all know, went on to a distinguished career in writing for television, in writing a variety of non-fiction books, in hosting radio shows, and then in either 2008 or 2009, depending on when you count from, was elected our United States Senator from Minnesota. And so we are very glad to have him serving us. The Humphrey School is nonpartisan, but our area, the Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy area, supports anyone who believes in the application of science to making good public policy, and Senator Franken is a friend to all of us at the university in that regard. So please join me in welcoming Senator Al Franken.
Thank you, Steve, for that great introduction, and for also organizing we had a panel discussion with an inordinate number of great scientists and researchers from the U on renewable energy and energy efficiency, and it was I've integrated it all and got it. So thank you for putting that together, and I want to thank the panelists who are going to be with me a little bit later. Steve is right. We wrestled together. I wrestled 120, and Steve was the state champion in our division, and wrestled at the unlimited weight bracket. So of the two of us, Steve is the only one at his high school weight. Seriously, thank you for putting this together and for reminding everyone about the recount. I'd like to start, if I could, with a quote from the President. He said, "Let us set our national goal in the spirit of Apollo with the determination of the Manhattan Project that by the end of this decade, we will have developed the potential to meet our energy needs without depending on any foreign energy sources." The reference, of course, was the Apollo program, John F. Kennedy's plan to beat the Soviets in the race to the moon. We had been in a heated competition in space since the Soviets had launched Sputnik in 1957. I was 6 years old in 1957. The race to space was on, and we were behind. And not only that, but the Soviets had nuclear weapons, and we were understandably terrified. As I said, I was 6 when Sputnik was launched. My brother Owen was 11. My parents sat us down in our living room in Albert Lea and told us that it was our job to study math and science to defeat the Soviets. Now, I thought that was a lot of pressure to put on a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old, but we were obedient sons, and Owen and I studied math and science, and we did it happily. My brother was the first in our family to go to college. He went to MIT and graduated with a degree in physics. I was also very good at math and science and tested extremely well and got into Harvard. Now, I became a comedian, and my brother became a photojournalist. But my parents were right. Owen and I studied math and science, and we beat the Soviets. America ended up winning the space race and getting a wave of innovations as a result, everything from transistors to hard plastics, innovations that spawned industries and still sustain jobs today. And now here we are facing another tremendous national challenge, transforming our national energy portfolio from one that relies on foreign oil to one built on clean, local American energy. If we succeed, we can create jobs and build entire new industries while reducing costs for American consumers and protecting our environment. If we fail, we will allow other countries to steal that potential and find ourselves in an even deeper environmental and economic mess. So I think the President was right on when he cast our energy challenge as a matter of national urgency on par with things like the space race and the Manhattan Project, except the President who said that was Richard Nixon. And when he called for energy independence, quote, by the end of the decade, he was talking about the 1970s. Recently, I took a seat on the Senate Energy Committee, and as I've gotten to work there, I've made a point of traveling around our state, meeting with entrepreneurs and community leaders and innovators in clean energy and energy efficiency. The good news is that Minnesota is way ahead of the country when it comes to this stuff. The bad news is that even after decades of rhetoric, Washington is way behind the curve, and that means America is falling further and further behind the rest of the world. Today, I want to talk about the gap between rhetoric and action that has paralyzed federal energy policy for decades. I want to talk about the gap between how people think about energy policy at the federal level and what we know about clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency here in Minnesota. And I want to talk about why, if Minnesota is going to lead the world in these emerging industries, it first has to lead Washington to understand the potential that it is squandering. Okay, first, the depressing stuff. Even before we were talking about the environmental and economic impact of our energy policy, we were talking about energy independence because it's dangerous to rely so heavily on foreign oil. Every president since Nixon has talked about energy independence. In fact, it's not only a cliche for a president to call for ending our dependence on foreign oil. It has become a cliche to point out that it's a cliche. Nobody thinks we should be more dependent on foreign oil, and yet net imports continue to rise. In 1980, at the end of that decade, it was 6.4 million barrels per day. In 1990, it was 7.2 million barrels. In 2000, it was 10.4 million. And during the Bush administration, it got to be as high as 12.5 million barrels a day. And of course, much of that oil comes from countries that the State Department deems dangerous or unstable. And yet, just as dangerous as it is to be vulnerable to global instability, it is even more dangerous to continue speeding toward an environmental catastrophe caused by global climate change. Now look, people are entitled to their opinions, but 98% of climate scientists say that climate change is happening and that it's man-made. Most of the other 2% work for coal companies or oil companies or the Heritage Foundation. And then there's this one other guy. And he's sincere, I think. He's a good guy. And even if people are entitled to their own opinions, they are not entitled to their own facts. And here are some facts. The last decade was the warmest on record. Ocean temperatures and sea levels continue to rise, as has the acidity of the oceans. Coral reefs are dying. Arctic sea ice and glaciers are shrinking. Let's say you went to 100 doctors to find out if your diet was making you feel poorly. 2 of the doctors work for a fast food chain, and they tell you that you're just fine, except that maybe you should be eating more fries to, keep your strength up. But 98 of them say your diet is making you sick, and then they show you test results proving that you're gaining a dangerous amount of weight. They do this by putting you on a scale and showing you pictures, one from a satellite. They also perform tests showing that your arteries are clogged and your cholesterol is the highest ever recorded in the history of man. But even if you want to ignore the overwhelming and frankly terrifying environmental changes we're seeing, even if you want to pretend that 98% of climate scientists don't add up to a consensus worth respecting, even if the only thing you believe in your life is that the American Petroleum Institute would never lie to you, you should still support building a renewable energy industry here in America for the sheer economic potential that it will create. In 2010, new investment in clean energy and energy efficiency totaled nearly $250 billion around the world, a 30% increase over 2009. The International Energy Agency estimates that global energy investment between 2007 and 2050 could be $270 trillion. Now, America has the best research labs, the best innovators, and the best manufacturing capacity in the world. That should be a market that we own. But we're losing this race. Before 2010, we were the world's most attractive country for renewable energy investment, but last year China beat us, and this year Germany's moving ahead of us as well. Remember that $250 billion, 20% of that went to China. Last year, China accounted for nearly half of all the new wind investment worldwide, and while China charges ahead, we're actually falling further behind. In 2010, we installed about half of the wind capacity we installed the year before. Same thing with solar. China makes half of the solar panels in use around the world today. So yes, this is our Sputnik moment, except this time the satellite is Chinese and German and South Korean and Israeli and Japanese and Danish. They are getting way ahead of us, and Washington doesn't seem all that excited about catching up. So what the heck is wrong with us? Now, I haven't been in Washington all that long, but I've noticed a few things. First, the nice thing about being a big oil company in America is that you can buy a lot of campaign ads. But don't get me wrong, elected officials who aren't sure about this transition aren't just responding to lies and threats from big oil and coal companies. They're responding to legitimate concerns from their districts, from employers whose businesses and workers whose jobs rely on cheap, old energy. Regulating greenhouse gases and subsidizing renewable energy might seem unfair to people whose jobs depend on coal-burning plants. But here is what I would say. For years now, decade upon decades, we've subsidized the oil industry through tax breaks. And for centuries, we've subsidized coal, too, by not requiring the industry to pay the damage done to the environment and to people's health and welfare. This is 19th century energy we're subsidizing, and I think we should be using subsidies to lay the foundation for a 21st century energy portfolio instead. Because the world is moving forward with or without us, and the cost of catching up is only going to get higher the longer that we wait. That's another problem with Washington. People don't like focusing on long-term issues. And when we talk about clean energy and energy efficiency, it feels to many people like a long-term issue, like it's about a lot of pain and cost now to avoid some potential economic or environmental catastrophe or realize some economic benefits sometime in the future. After all, this isn't the only challenge that we're facing. There are many demands on our already overstretched budget, not to mention on the time and political capital of lawmakers. And if you think of renewable energy and energy efficiency as being investments that only pay off in the future, it's easy to put off making those investments today. And that, folks, brings me to what Minnesota knows about renewable energy and energy efficiency that Washington still doesn't completely get. It's not just about the next century, it's about the jobs and industries we're missing out on right now. It's about the economic potential we squander every time and every day we aren't taking great leaps toward a renewable energy economy. That's why Minnesota passed the nation's highest renewable energy standard in 2007. It's why Minnesota utilities are beating even the ambitious standard we have set. It's why we set the ambitious goal of getting 10% of our transportation fuel from ethanol, and when the rest of the country was slow to follow our lead, we just doubled our efforts and our goal, and it's why we're not waiting for federal biodiesel standards. We in Minnesota have established our own standard of 20% biodiesel by 2015. And as I've learned on my recent travels through the state, it's why big business and small farmers, research scientists and entrepreneurs, labor and environmental groups, people who care about the next century and people who care about the next fiscal quarter, all of them are working together to make Minnesota a world leader in clean energy. There's a reason Minnesotans get it. We are smack in the middle of America's renewable energy belt. And now that I've joined the Senate Energy Committee, I'm making it my job to ensure that it's Minnesota's voice that is heard when we talk about this issue. Here in Minnesota, we know that the cheapest barrel of oil is the one that you don't have to buy. We also know that energy efficiency is a huge job creator. Down in Faribault, Sage Electrochromics has developed windows that harness the sun's energy to make buildings more efficient. When we think of our energy consumption, we think of cars, but 40% of our energy is consumed by buildings. And at Sage, they've developed a process, and I think I got this right, where they spray on this molecular size molecules. When I studied math and science, it was a long time ago. And essentially, it's a plasma that they melt on to this window glass. And in the summer, they program it, and it darkens to block out all the UV light and lower, of course, the air conditioning bill. And in the winter, it becomes clear and doesn't block anything and lets in all the light and the heat. And they use photovoltaic cells, little ones, to power the whole technology. It's pretty cool. It's also profitable. And thanks to a loan guarantee from the Department of Energy, this year Sage will be building a new electrochromic glass manufacturing plant, adding 160 permanent jobs, new jobs, in southern Minnesota, and 200 new construction jobs. In Maple Grove, I attended the ribbon cutting for Great River Energy's new LEED Platinum headquarters, the first building in Minnesota to achieve that status, with rooftop solar voltaic panels, its own wind turbine, a state-of-the-art geothermal heating and cooling system, and even toilets that run on rainwater. They've cut their energy consumption in half and their water usage by 2/3, savings that boost their bottom line. I've also been to Elk River to meet Del Overholzer, the president of Econar, which makes geothermal heat transfer pumps and puts in geothermal systems for houses and buildings. Del had told me he believed in geothermal his entire adult life, but it wasn't catching on. But he kept at it and eventually he opened a plant as it became more popular. He started manufacturing heat pumps in Appleton, Minnesota. Well, a few years ago, geothermal started taking off, and a company in Indiana wanted to buy Del out, wanted to buy Econar. And this was his payday. And they wanted to move the plant, though, to Indianapolis. So he got in his car and drove to Appleton to break the news to his employees, and on the way, he decided he just couldn't do it. So when he got there, Del told him, "Never mind, I'm not selling." Well, the whole time Del was telling me this story, this bell would keep going off in his office. And when he finished, I asked Del, I said, "Well, how's it going?" And he said, you hear that bell, those bells? They go off every time someone orders one of our systems. Best thing I ever did was not sell the company. You go around Minnesota, you see a whole lot of what we're doing right. Take District Energy in St. Paul. They're using local Minnesota biomass and whatever biomass they get to generate electricity in their power plant, capturing the waste heat and redirecting it to heat and cool downtown St. Paul. They serve all four of St. Paul's hospitals and 80% of the downtown buildings. Their thermal innovations have brought representatives from dozens of countries to St. Paul to see how District Energy has managed to keep rates stable for years. You know, when most people, me and Steve's age, think of energy efficiency or conservation, we think of Jimmy Carter wearing a cardigan sweater and telling Americans to turn the thermostat to 55 in the winter and 85 in the summer. But if you've ever been inside a LEED school or a LEED office building, you know that it is just the opposite. These are gorgeous buildings and great places to go to school and to work. I was in a LEED school in Elk River, and the light in the school was magnificent. And it's been shown that kids who go to lead schools miss fewer days of school every year because of asthma days. Energy efficiency is win-win. Meanwhile, Minnesota continues to take the lead on developing energy sources that aren't just clean and efficient, but also local. If North Dakota is the Saudi Arabia of wind, we've got to be at least the Kuwait. And just as oil-wealthy nations would be insane not to tap into their resources, Minnesota is tapping into ours. I spent a day out at the University of Minnesota Morris, where they've built 2 wind turbines that supply power to nearly every building on campus. They built a biomass gasification plant, which provides power and heat and cooling, and the campus has virtually a zero carbon footprint. And other schools are catching on as well, like Mesabi Range College and Bemidji State. Students in their wind technology programs have been getting jobs even before they graduate. Meanwhile, in Laverne, I visited the headquarters of MinWind and learned about 15 community wind projects that allow farmers and landowners to own a financial stake in renewable energy production, so the money stays in the local community and generates more economic development. And in LeSueur, labor is getting on board, as IBEW Local 343 members are training on a practice tower, getting ready to fill the Minnesota wind jobs of tomorrow. I went there, I visited, and I went into the tower. They strapped me on a harness, and I went up part way, and then I said, okay, I get the idea. And that's the thing about building wind farms in rural communities. At a time when rural communities are losing young people, wind creates jobs that only can be filled by young people. Someone has to go to the top and service those turbines. And you know what? I can't do that anymore, and neither can you, Steve. And I don't mean to pick on you. Out in Wilmer, they told me that they've decided to rely on local energy to cut costs at a time when every rural community's budget is stretched. They own 2 wind turbines. Public buildings use geothermal heating systems. There's a municipal corncob combustion project. They're working on developing a small solar farm. They're taking West Central Minnesota's natural resources and using them to strengthen the rural economy. In Fergus Falls, I toured Ottertail Ag Enterprises. They're building a 55 million gallon per year ethanol plant relying on Minnesota corn, but also Minnesota investors. Now, a word about ethanol. I think we all know if we're going to get a higher ethanol mandate, and I believe we should, then we simply can't produce enough corn to do it. And I hear people argue against even our current use of corn and ethanol. And let me say this, corn ethanol is a transition to cellulosic ethanol, and cellulosic is happening. The first commercial scale cellulosic plant is starting construction this year in Emmetsburg, Iowa. And when we are using wood wastes and grasses and crop residues that don't compete with food, I want it to be happening here in Minnesota. Let me give you an example. Just last week I was up in Isanti at Evercat Fuels. The company was started because scientists from the U and from Augsburg developed a revolutionary process for producing biodiesel, and they use oil from all kinds of feedstocks, including, and very significantly, the seed oil of inedible plants. The promise of this process blew me away, just like I was blown away back in 2007 when I first saw the windows at Sage. We are closing in on a new generation of biofuels, and that's why as we go into the fiscal year 2012 budget, I'm pushing for robust funding in agricultural R&D to develop the feedstocks and processes to produce advanced biofuels in a sustainable way. And that's why, along with Senator Klobuchar, whose staff is with us today, I'm a co-sponsor of Tom Harkin's Biofuels Market Expansion Act, which would invest in ethanol infrastructure and position our automobile fleet for the transition to cellulosic ethanol. At a time when about 70% of the oil we import goes to transportation, when imported oil is responsible for more than half of our country's trade deficit, and we're paying $4 a gallon for gas, this legislation would make renewable fuel pipelines and other infrastructure eligible for loan guarantees and grant programs, and it would require that half of all large gas stations have blender pumps that blend higher grades of ethanol by the year 2020. As you may know, the EPA recently approved the use of E15 in cars built since 2001, and the auto industry is now telling us that there's no reason that in the very near future every car that runs on gasoline can't use E30 or E40. Meanwhile, Minnesota is the country's leader in small and community wind projects. I'm working with Senator Tester to introduce legislation in the coming weeks that's going to make it easier for communities to come together and build wind projects. And that means we need to build transmission lines to carry power from Montana and Minnesota to other parts of the country, and the smart grid that can make the system work. We need to be smarter in the way we use energy. District Energy might be the largest facility of its kind in North America, but it is just unbelievable to me that we're not doing this in every city of the country. China is now building cities from the ground up and putting in district energy systems. Last year, I introduced a bill with Kit Bond, a Republican from Missouri, that creates incentives to build more of these systems around the country, and I'll be introducing it again this year. I could go on and on, but the point is that Minnesota profits handsomely from using its resources, not just wind and agriculture and the next generation of biofuels, but entrepreneurship and innovation and investment to meet its energy needs. And even though Washington may be moving slowly, I'm committed to providing our state with the tools to keep racing ahead. But if we are going to realize the full potential of renewable energy and energy efficiency here in Minnesota, we have to break the logjam that has crippled our efforts to move our energy policy forward at the federal level. We need to jumpstart the American renewable energy industry and give a boost to Minnesota by building a market for renewable energy. That means a national energy standard to give renewable energy industries the certainty that they need to invest in new wind farms and biomass projects. Now, the President has set a goal of 80% clean energy by 2035, and I think it's important here to be clear on the difference between clean and renewable energy. When some people talk about clean energy, they include nuclear because it has a negligible carbon footprint, and often efficient natural gas because it burns cleaner than coal. Some even talk about including coal if you can sequester and store the CO2. And if you did include all of those, achieving an 80% clean energy standard would not be all that difficult. So we have to be careful. We can't let a so-called clean energy standard destroy incentives to invest in real renewables like solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, and biomass. We have a renewable 25 by 25 standard here in Minnesota. I want to see a national standard of 35% renewables by 2035 as part of the overall 80% clean energy goal. Minnesota has the renewables that can help the country meet that goal, but we need to build the infrastructure. We need to make it easier for renewable energy projects to access financing. We need to boost our manufacturing of renewable energy technology through expanding incentives, like the advanced manufacturing tax credits that expired last year, and we need incentives to retrofit our homes and commercial buildings. It creates jobs and saves our families and businesses energy and money. And we need to make sure that we don't start from behind when it comes to the next important innovations, and that means a robust investment in research and development. If America doesn't provide an incubator for emerging technologies, they'll emerge somewhere else instead. And when those industries grow and create jobs, Americans won't be the ones filling them. Minnesota can lead this debate by talking about how our own ambitious renewable energy standard built a market that our entrepreneurs and producers are rushing to fill. We can talk about how well our public and private investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies have already paid off. We can set an example with the coalition of academics, farmers, business leaders, environmentalists, labor leaders, and policymakers we've built, the kind that I've been visiting with. And we can all play a role in convincing Washington to catch up with us. Minnesota economists can produce reports on the benefit to our state from our early investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. The business community can use its influence to make the case for a federal commitment to supporting these emerging technologies, making sure it's known that they provide jobs, not in the far-off future, but now when we need them the most. And as Minnesota's representative on the Energy Committee, I can bring our voice to Washington, and even better, I can bring Washington to Minnesota. I have a commitment from the Department of Energy to join Minnesota stakeholders at a summit my office is putting together for later this year. We will have a lot to talk about there. We all have a lot to gain if we can finally realize the ambition that we fostered for 40 years and make our energy policy cleaner, cheaper, safer, and smarter. But no one has more to gain than Minnesotans, and no one has a bigger stake in this debate. That's why I couldn't have been more excited to join the Senate Energy Committee. It's why I look forward to working with this incredible coalition to keep our state at the front of the pack in the next year, in the next decade, and in the next century. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's really nice to hear someone talking about innovation, not only in Minnesota, but innovation in ideas in Washington, D.C. as well. So thank you very much for that. We're going to do a little bit of a transition, so we have to open up the curtains and make sure that things are booted. I have the pleasure of introducing our first presenter to follow Senator Franken. Dean Robert Eldey is the longest serving of the deans at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. He's the dean of the College of Biological Sciences and is a terrifically appropriate person to be part of this conversation. I got to know Dean Eldey a number of years ago when the legislature helped to one of the things that Senator Franken had a chance to hear about during our roundtable conversation was the number of University of Minnesota researchers whose work received seed funding from the Initiative on Renewable Energy and the Environment. And the legislature helped to provide some money to create that, but I found that oftentimes good legislative ideas can fall through in poor implementation. And I think Minnesota was fortunate that Dean Eldey and the late Ted Davis, the then dean of the the Institute of Technology, as a team took on the task of implementing in the University of Minnesota a grant system for renewable energy and environmental initiatives by the university's researchers, and that has already yielded economic fruit for Minnesota and has the potential to do it even more in the future. So please welcome Dean Eldey.
Thank you, Steve. I am exceedingly grateful as the bright lights are shining in my eye here. There we go, I think. There. Very, very pleased to be here with you today. I'm grateful to Steve and his colleagues for organizing this, and particularly grateful to Senator Franken for his leadership at the national level and here in the state. So the challenge we were asked to address is what do we know about clean energy and how can we explain it to Washington? So as a science nerd, I tried to take that challenge seriously, and I tried to distill it down to some elements where I think we can look in the moonshot kind of parlance. We can look toward the future, and I think you can count, Senator Franken, on the people of the University of Minnesota, our faculty and our students, who have really picked up this torch and are doing amazing things with it. So I'd like to simplify it and portray it as kind of a unitary feature. And, you know, it's to a great extent all about photons. And I'm sure, Senator Franken, you learned about photons back in those science classes. And the photons that are important for nearly all forms of energy, and it's a little bit of a stretch to put this to wind, but in fact, the wind currents are generated by the heating-cooling cycles. But I'm talking about photons a little more directly, and there are really two kind of facets. And the Department of Energy, thanks to President Obama and Secretary Chu, have really picked up on using photons to power the future Earth. So, you know, this is nuclear reactions, because this is a new big nuclear reactor some distance far away from us so that it's safe, and that's the sun. And so the sun is constantly emitting photons. A very small fraction of those rain upon our planet. And biological systems have evolved over the eons to capitalize on those photons. And in fact, life on this planet is dependent upon those photons and the biological process called photosynthesis that harvests the energy from those photons, converts it into oxygen, upon which we're dependent, and into the materials that the planet, living part of the planet, feeds upon. I'm not going to spend much time, but we also harvest, and the great strides have been made and continue to be made in the use of harnessing photons to create electricity directly through photovoltaic cells and through solar thermal devices creating heat. But the challenge that I would like to, and I should go back and say that actually our dependence on fossil fuels was a dependence on photosynthesis in geologic times. So the coal that we burn, the oil that we drill and pump, was all photosynthesis, but eons ago. And as you know, we're running out of that. And the consequence of harvesting that carbon and combusting it into the atmosphere is what is driving us toward what appears to be this environmental disaster. And I would like to posit that in this era of genome-enabled biology, that we should be smart enough to come closer to harvesting the energy from photosynthesis, converting the energy from the sun's rays into fuels and materials in real time. We do many things in real time now that we never used to. Why can't we do this? So the administration has, I think, wisely carved out a parallel to the moonshot, the Apollo program, as Senator Franken referred to, and it's called Sunshot. And it focuses primarily on those first two physical forms of capturing energy from the sun, namely photovoltaic and solar thermals. And what I'd like to encourage the senator to carry back to Washington is that the farms and the fields, the landscape of Minnesota has the potential, with the ingenuity of the people of Minnesota, to power photosynthesis in new ways and realize that potential. So this is a schematic that's very simple, but portrays that capturing of sunlight in the form of photons, combining with water, carbon dioxide, and producing oxygen upon which life forms like us are totally dependent, and the carbohydrates that are the material of the plant, the material that became fossilized into oil and coal, but the material that now our clever people, some of whom you heard today at the round table, have figured out how to come really close to real time in capturing the energy that is in the form of those carbohydrates. And if we go back to the pioneering days when our forebears came and settled this land and brought the plows, there was a lot of photosynthesis. There was a lot of energy stored latent in those soils, in those prairies. And I show this to depict and remind us that whereas we look at our crops today and think about the above ground mass, the prairies, in fact, had a very deep underground biomass. Perhaps 2/3 of the biomass is underground. And in consortia, those roots of those prairie species in consortia with microbes were an incredible carbon store. And that carbon store was lost with the plow, and our subsequent cropping with annual cycles of agricultural products we now have become very dependent on, particularly soybeans and corn. And so a near-term strategy may in fact be, how can we increasingly and in a nuanced way restore prairie species as buffers, if you will, buffers to prevent the erosion of soil, buffers to prevent the transfer of nitrates and herbicides into the water streams that are the other confound of our current agricultural practices. Can these consortia of microbes, soil microbes and plants be used both to buffer that and harvested as renewable energy biomass crops? And there's increasing evidence, and this is being scaled up, that this is indeed a short-term possibility. And a real question on this whole plant biomass side of the equation is, can the increased use, the restoration of degraded farmlands be used to actually move from our current situation, you see on the left, where we're harvesting fossil carbon and combusting it into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide? Could we move to the right to not through that zone of carbon negative biofuels by using perennials to increase the storage of carbon in those soils, or even move to a future where we produce fuels that are carbon negative, in that there is more capture of carbon on an annual basis than there is release of carbon by our use of those products. So I would like to encourage the Senator to propose Sunshot version 2.0 to the administration. And version 2.0 is based in large part on, I think, the resounding success of ARPA-E. So ARPA-E is an acronym derivatized from DARPA, which was the Defense Advanced Projects Research proposals. And this one has been coined by Secretary Chu to focus on renewable energy. And it has spawned an amazing amount of some of the most creative science that's going on in our country today. And we're very proud of projects here at the University of Minnesota that received funding in that first round. These are truly visionary projects and are, I think, harnessing the imagination of our next generation. One of our most important products at the university are students who can carry this torch. But we have to move beyond ARPA-E and really expand this into the sort of sunshot that I think this deserves. And so let's just compare it quickly to the moonshot. Where were we when the goal was articulated? What did we know? What was the level of science upon which the Apollo project, the moonshot, was based? What were the payoffs? I won't dwell on this. Senator Franken already suggested that incredible unanticipated payoffs, as well as the landing of a person on the moon, were the outcomes. And if we think about that moonshot, it was science that was not fresh. It was science that Newton described, the physical laws of bodies in the field of gravity. It was Goddard and the development of rockets and propellants for rockets in light of Newton's laws. And then finally, it was computers to compute the trajectory of those rockets. And beyond that, there wasn't much else of a science base. And I would argue that today, the Sunshot could be put on steroids. It ought to harness what pundits have said is the most transformable technology of our time, that is genome-enabled biology. The Human Genome Project, which enabled the sequencing of the human genome, has totally transformed all of biology. It's never the same. The fact that we can dig in and uncover the details of the blueprint of every living organism makes it possible to both for biology and biological systems to have become totally engineerable. So with that, I think we as a university community could help advance even further the good progress this state has enjoyed, harvest the intended and the unintended consequences of a Sunshot version 2.0. And so I'd like to close by just saying I think you can tell Washington it's about photons and it's about photosynthesis, and it can bring us to the future in a remarkable way. Thank you so very much.
Our next speaker, and so I probably should help before I get too far. We'll ease the transition. Our next speaker is Mr. Michael Roman, who is the general manager of the Renewable Energy Division of the 3M Company. He has previously served in a number of 3M divisions and in various parts of the country. And I think one of the messages from earlier today, one of the messages from Senator Franken's speech, and what we're hearing in a combination of Dean Eldey's remarks and what we'll hear from Mr. Roman is that this the solution is probably very diverse. That we are going to see multiple strategies for figuring out how to meet our energy needs, and we're going to hear another set of strategies from Mr. Roman. Please welcome him.
Well, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here to share with you how we're building a renewable energy business in 3M. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about something that I think you'll see we're very passionate about in our company, both in our teams and in our researchers as well. And I want to thank the Senator and the Humphrey Institute for this opportunity to share that with you. Just a quick context for what we're going to talk about in renewable energy. 3M is a $27 billion company. It's very diversified in technology. It's a global enterprise. And we have these 6 big businesses that make up our company, some of them dating back 107 years to their start in northern Minnesota in the industrial and transportation business. But we look to innovate, and we look for new opportunities and emerging business opportunities. And these are just a few of the areas that we're very excited about in building businesses today. And you can see renewable energy is a big part of that picture for us. Behind that, 3M remains an innovative company built on a broad range of technology platforms, and we have our own periodic table because for us it's a lot like the periodic table. We combine these technologies in many times kind of surprising ways to build new solutions to sometimes even unarticulated problems. And we're definitely leveraging a broad range of these platform technologies in 3M to build our renewable energy business and to solve customer problems, and I'll talk more about that as we go. I want to just give you a little background on some of the passion in 3M. 3M has been a leader in sustainability, and we have people and teams and entire divisions and even subsidiaries that are passionate about this topic, and we have a very strong track record that we're proud of. We have 79% absolute reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, not indexed for sales. That's over the last 10 years, almost the last 10 years. And we've been recognized by the Department of Energy and Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and recently we were a global winner of the Best in Class category for the Gigaton Award, one of 2 American companies to win that award in the inaugural year. So I think we have a strong reputation, and like I said, it's really that the root of it is the passion and the people in the company to really make a difference. We turn that into businesses too, and so those technologies start to get combined many times starting in small innovative laboratories in the company and moving out and blossoming into larger businesses. And we're working on a variety of areas that we would characterize as clean tech, everything from biofuels, which is actually part of my division now, and energy systems and CO2 recycling and a lot of innovative technologies around improving the quality of water in many different applications, both in consumer and residential and industrial kinds of application. So a broad range of technologies coming out and becoming part of that clean tech portfolio. And then we start to get very pragmatic. We start to look at how do we invest, and we have disciplined approaches to investing in emerging businesses, everything from emerging business opportunities where we can form an organization globally or within a country or a region, to launching entrepreneurial activities like the renewable energy business. And we got venture funding from inside our company. Our company's invested tens of millions of dollars in getting this renewable energy business off the ground within 3M. And then we continue to seek out and invest in new ventures in other emerging areas. And so the renewable energy division didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't happenstance or even luck. It was, a lot of entrepreneurial activity coming together with some, well thought out and disciplined investments and starting to build momentum, and we can start to build a business. And today, this is what it is. We have a global division that serves customers in the area of photovoltaic, solar, and concentrated solar, and wind and biofuels. We also have a conservation side of our division, which has a strong core of our window film technologies, helping that energy efficiency and the building envelope and the LEED certification, and actually just saving money for people in the energy efficiency technologies. And there's a business side to this. 3M has got shareholders. We're a public company. We do this to have a return on investment. So we have a lot of passion at the bench level, and we also have an expectation to be able to build a successful business. And this gives you a little bit of highlight of where we've come from. So we had pieces that came together, and we made a step change after we formed this division in 2009, and now almost doubled the size last year. And our earnings report this morning, we were leading the company again in growth rates through the first quarter of the year. So very strong growth. So it can be good business to be part of renewable energy, and even with a broad portfolio as we have. And so that focus on products and technologies and the customers in this industry have served us well. So what's behind that? And I thought I'd highlight a few things of, things that have been key enablers of that kind of growth. I talked a little bit about the investment, and the investment really allowed us to have critical mass and resources, and it allowed us to build out that portfolio of products. When you go out and try to help this industry and help customers that are out there solve their cost or efficiency challenges with a solar photovoltaic module, you got to have resources. Otherwise, they figure it out pretty quickly. We need to be able to scale up manufacturing, so we got support to invest in manufacturing sites close to our customers. And ultimately, our value proposition is we have to help everybody reduce the cost per watt or the cost per kilowatt hour. And that's our formula. If we can't do that, we don't win in our business. And if you look at what's driving our growth, that's behind the formula. And then we have some great partnerships. We have strong partnerships into our corporate laboratories, and we have a myriad of corporate laboratories that have capabilities not only in technology but in manufacturing process. 3M's formula for success is innovation in product technologies, and it's innovation in manufacturing process. But we also have now a multi-year partnership with the Department of Energy, and we've been doing joint R&D in a number of programs, and I'll highlight a couple of those for you as I go through my overview. So there's some business results that we're proud of. I'll just highlight these. Our business was up almost 80% last year. Our generation business up more than 300%. Our solar business up 600%. Our window film business up more than 30%. And we have a strong presence, as Senator Franken talked about, the leadership in solar in China. We have a strong presence there, but we're also leading the U.S. growth. And so we're about 3 times 3M's growth in the U.S., and we're doing better than this as we go through the first quarter. So very strong U.S. business and a very strong outlook for that going forward. So just I want to touch a little more depth on the generation business so you can see a little bit about what we do in that area. We bring a number of solutions to help make the more efficient solar photovoltaic modules. So everything from films that can protect and improve the performance and efficiency of those modules to new innovations like what we call ultra barrier film, which is a replacement for glass on the front side of solar panels. Makes them lighter, cheaper, easier to install, really can help reduce that cost per kilowatt hour. And then we've got a lot of innovations around what you'd think of as a classic 3M portfolio, tapes, adhesives, films, coatings, to help reduce that cost per watt or that cost per kilowatt hour. And even cleaning is a big factor. In many of the environments, the loss of energy generation capabilities in solar from dirty modules is a big factor. So if we can keep them from soiling quite so fast, we can really make a big difference in that whole formula. And so we actually break it down. I don't think we have, I'm not going to talk about science on the level of Dean Eldes, but we break it down into something very mathematical with our customers. Where can we save your dollars per watt? What are the technologies can do that? Sometimes to what we call a centicent, a hundredth of a penny per watt is sometimes worthwhile working on with our customers. And this was an example of that That front-side barrier film, we launched that last year at the Solar Power International Show, and really people grabbed onto that quickly as something that could really drive innovative cost solutions. And this is something that we made an investment in manufacturing here in the U.S. in our Columbia, Missouri plant. And this was supported by the Sunshot, the initial Sunshot initiative. We received $4.4 million to help drive this investment. And this was an accelerated bet ahead of the curve. And so it was really important to have that partnership with Sunshot. But to kind of look more broadly, I think this is to give you kind of the business perspective on how we look at investing in manufacturing in this kind of business. We really have to be close to our customers. So it's where, and we typically sell to the people who manufacture solar modules or wind turbines. And so we need to be close to them. So where their markets are, that's where we are. We have to be where we can attract talent. So STEM programs is very important to us, and having that kind of talent available. We look at competitive effective tax rate, and this is a big factor. It's not about cost of labor. For us, the effective tax rate is the big factor for manufacturing locations. Labor costs are not a deciding factor. And then proximity to supply. We've seen with the Japan crisis, Toyota and the automobile industry's challenge is supply chain, not their own manufacturing typically. So the things that can be more certain, there's nothing certain in life and business, but something that has more permanency to it is a very important part of the formula, and something that supports results over necessarily a specific choice. We can help innovate if we know where the results will be rewarded. So that gives you kind of, and that formula came together in that plant for Columbia, Missouri, and it's a great part of our plan for future growth. And then there's concentrated solar. We have a lot of films technology, very exciting technologies. The upper left-hand corner is a partnership with 10K Solar here in the Twin Cities, where we actually use our multi-layer optical film to reflect the most useful part of the solar spectrum. So we aren't reflecting the glare or the thermal. We're just reflecting 90% of the valuable part of it, and we can greatly reduce the cost per watt. The cost of our film is much lower than the cost of a module, and so it can have a big advantage. And there are many other technologies. The reflective mirror technologies can reduce the cost of a mirror film field by up to 30%. So a lot of innovative opportunities for us there, and we're building business. And we also have solutions in wind around making blades cheaper to manufacture, longer lasting, easier to maintain, and higher performance while in operation. And then we also have a biofuel business, and we actually have a partnership here with the U of M on some activity that we're doing. This, Senator Franken talked a lot about the future, a bright future for biofuels. There's a large base of refineries in the U.S. today, and we are working to help them. And so we've got a program with the University of Minnesota and Archer Daniel Midlands, among other partners, and we're working on a way to improve the efficiency, energy efficiency of the distillation process of both corn-based and cellulosic ethanol production, as well as have a significant savings in water usage. So it's a non-woven filtration technology that can really improve the efficiency of that distillation process. We're very excited about the potential for that as we move forward with cellulosic industry. And I won't go into a lot of detail about conservation side of our business, but it really is a great return on investment story for customers and for us as a business. And there are a lot of trends that drive this, everything from consumer spend on energy to green buildings and LEED standards and the benefits from those. And in one of the businesses we leverage our film technologies on window films. We have we put 500 layers of film in a paper-thin kind of format, and we can tune it to reject solar heat gain and pass visible light, and without metal, without dyes, and have basically a clear film that can do that. So it's been a very strong growth opportunity for us and a very good performer in supportive of the LEED certification for many customers out there. So I'll just wrap it up. That's the renewable energy piece with a little bit of detail around it. But we look at energy systems much broader, and we're excited about areas like storage and conservation broader than the building envelope, and new innovative technologies and films around lighting. So there's a lot of things we see, very strong and bright future for renewable energy and conservation businesses for 3M. So thank you.
We are now privileged to hear from Commissioner Mark Phillips, the Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And he recently, it was just this year that he took on that role, and he came to that after spending 28 years in economic development. And like our other speakers, he has a record of innovation. He helped to develop the Northeast Venture. It was a community development venture capital firm, which is a great combination of ideas. And so we're very pleased to have another innovator with us this afternoon. Commissioner Phillips.
Thank you very much, and I will join the crowd in thanking Senator Franken for putting this evening together, or afternoon together. Not part of my prepared remarks, but I was talking to Dr. Elde briefly back in, I started my economic development career in the early 80s in the Perpich administration, and if any of you are old enough to recall how Governor Perpich was really into alternative energy, and I worked at Iron Range Resources, and we converted a lot of schools to wood pellet, and actually some to dried wood pellets and some to green wood chips. There was a horticultural peat operation we ran out at Wilderness Valley Farms just south of the Iron Range. It was donated by Gino Paolucci. It's where he started chunking foods. And we did a multi-year experiment on doing peat for energy. So milled peat and burning it. We put a boiler out there. So I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve. And when energy prices dropped, then all of a sudden a lot of this work, but I mean the work was still valuable because I think what we're doing is picking up on some of that. I mean, I'm seeing now I'm being approached by people that want to put in wood pellet operations and export the pellets to Europe. I mean, to tell you how we're the center of this kind of activity. I know we want to get to the questions, so I had a little bit of preparation on some of the projects, but Senator Franken went through some of those. So I'll just talk a little bit about the Dayton administration and what we're about when it comes to green jobs. We've launched a green job study back in the end of 2009 that's still going on. But what we're trying to do is identify the kinds of jobs that will be created around the green initiatives. And it's a wide range, but the one thing I just want to point out, and I'm going to jump into a job creation side of this speech, but the one thing that we've learned about from this study that's not completed yet, but the initial findings is that, again, STEM education is crucial to this to these industries. And that's true for all our jobs. What we're finding is there's no jobs, and I don't care if it's in the green industry or anything else, high-tech manufacturing or whatever. So higher ed is the key to, and investment in higher education is key to the job market in Minnesota, period. And what I'm trying to figure out now is what are we going to do with the incumbent workforce, because we have a shrinking incoming workforce. And although it's been delayed a little bit by this recession, we're seeing the expansion of our people leaving the workforce. So if Minnesota is going to be competitive in any way, green is good, but also a highly educated workforce is even more important. So we're trying to figure out how do we educate this incumbent workforce that may be laid off or have a high school education and need a career change and things like that. So we're working with the higher ed, with the university and with MnSCU campuses on something called Fast Track, where we're going to try to get people a new career path. One thing growing up on the Iron Range, when somebody lost their job, when the mines were down and there were layoffs, usually the state helped them find another job, but usually it was 2 or 3 rungs down the economic ladder, where I'm viewing things like green energy and things like that as a new career pathway, so we can get people a certificate or a degree in something that would get them a new career, rather than having to move down the economic ladder slightly. Well, having said that, I'm going to move on to the job creation side and what the Dayton administration views their role in some of this green energy and green job. One thing that Governor Dayton has really put a lot of emphasis on is that the departments working together. And he put together a good team. We've had several cabinet meetings, but he's put us together on a number of initiatives, and one of them is called the Green Enterprise Assistance Team. And it brings together the Department of Employment and Economic Development, the DNR, Agriculture, Commerce, MPCA, Iron Range Resources, and MnDOT. And this group is trying to develop a concierge service for companies that are interested in developing green jobs and green tech, we call it. And we've been meeting regularly, and I think we're figuring it out. And if you recall, he signed an executive order on increasing the permitting or decreasing the permitting time down to 150 days. So let's give people an answer. And well, that's just not easy. In a state like Minnesota, with we're unique in the sense of the watersheds we have and things like that. So bringing that time frame down and still doing a good job for the environment isn't that easy. So this is the group of departments that are working on that. But we also see the opportunity for, again, creating green jobs. So many of these jobs aren't making maybe blades for wind turbines, but a lot of it's in analysis and assessment, engineering. Again, science, STEM education is the key to all these kinds of jobs that are being put together. The other thing we did was worked on, and this was Department of Commerce, indeed, particularly, worked on an executive order where we're trying to drive the energy costs on state-owned buildings. We're starting with state-owned buildings. We're going to move on from there, 25%. And we've modeled this after Pennsylvania, where they did a very good job of turning energy conservation into jobs. And right now we're very concerned about the construction industry in Minnesota. It only represents about 4% of our workforce in Minnesota, but it represents about 29% of our unemployed in Minnesota right now is the construction industry. It has not enjoyed the recovery that many other industries have. So we thought, how can we conserve energy and create jobs in the construction industry? And Pennsylvania's model was to look at state buildings, try to drive the energy consumption down 25%, and in doing so, but looking at all aspects of the building. In other words, what's happened in the past is they look at mechanical systems and controls primarily because they have very fast paybacks. 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they'll make that investment in a heartbeat, and they'll ignore things like building envelope and insulation and windows and things like that. So Pennsylvania's approach was the total package. So as long as you had an economic situation where the overall project had a fair payback and was financeable under that payback, so this will not affect the state budget. These all have to be self-financed through energy savings. But we'll look at all those aspects, and what you do then is you put carpenters to work and roofers to work and window manufacturers and all those things. HVAC, I see people from McQuay here. Again, if that's the double bottom line, if we could buy the equipment from a Minnesota manufacturer. So that's why I'm very proud of the work we did on this executive order. And what was the difference between Pennsylvania and previous executive orders in Minnesota around energy conservation is not having somebody drive it. So we have a commitment from the Department of Commerce. They are going to provide an individual or a small team of individuals that will drive this, much like Pennsylvania did. They did about 4,300 construction jobs in the first year, and it continues on today, so that's the model that we want to do. The other thing that we're focusing on at DEED is a focus on biomass, biofuels, wind and solar. So having said that, I just met yesterday with the second, you heard about 10K Solar here. The second solar manufacturer in Minnesota is just opening this summer in Mountain Iron called Silicon Energy. And they have a very friendly solar panel that they've developed that's friendly to our climate. And so we're looking forward to that. They've come to me with some ideas for some further incentives and things that the senator talked about that's necessary to get these industries off the ground. They want to work on some financing things that could maybe help schools get involved in some solar projects. Schools are a lot of flat roofs in the state on school buildings, so that we're looking at that. And then the last thing is we do have a concentrated effort to work on the supply chain side of renewable energy projects. And so we strategize on both in all wind, solar, biomass, what can we do on the supply chain side to make sure that we're well positioned, because I think the gentleman from 3M said you need to be near where the people are utilizing your products. So if we can do more solar manufacturing here in Minnesota, that will lead 3M maybe to put a film factory here or something someday. So with that, again, we're strategically thinking about green jobs and green energy, and trying to utilize all the tools that DEED has at its disposal. And we could use more tools if there's any state legislators in the room. But so we're working very hard on that, and I'll get down to the question and answers here. So thank you very much.
So we have a number of questions, and we are going to move as rapidly as possible. And I know that I have heard Senator Franken explain why I ought to be a U.S. Senator in 2 minutes or less, so we ought to be able to answer these questions pretty quickly. A couple of our speakers mentioned science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education as important to the future. And one of our questioners asked about the support for workforce that was in the stimulus funding. Senator, maybe you could comment briefly on your approach to the need to develop a scientifically and equipped workforce for the future.
It's unbelievably important. Of the 20 careers that or industries that are going to be hiring the most people in the future, in the near future, 18 of them require STEM education. I was very relieved that we kept as much of the workforce money as we did in the 2011 budget. They wanted to wipe out all Title I of WIA, and which would have been an absolute disaster. WIA is the Workforce Investment Act, and there are 16 workforce boards in this state. Every one of them is run by the head of it is a business person, and the reason for that is those people they're the ones that hire the people that are trained. And I got on the phone with them when the House wanted to really completely zero out the Title I of WIA. And I said, just get on the phone, would you? Just get on the phone. You're business people. Get on the phone to your members of Congress. This is terrible, what they're talking about doing. And I know how important these workforce boards are in Minnesota. Let me talk about STEM. Yesterday I went to Montemedi. Montemedi, from K through 12, they're doing a STEM curriculum. And one of the committees I'm on is health, education, labor, and pension. I'm trying to get. I've written a piece of legislation called the STEM Master Corps, which is to get science and technology and engineering and math teachers who are good at what they do to bump them up in terms of status, to make them master teachers so that they can train teachers that aren't STEM teachers who are newer or not as good as they are, and give them professional development and reward them, because teachers who teach STEM are probably more valuable on the open market than teachers who teach Moby Dick, although God bless the Moby Dick teachers. And then this is the last thing I'll say about that, but about this is that we're reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act this year, I hope, otherwise known as No Child Left Behind. And if you go to the STEM magnet schools or you go to Montemedi, what you find is that they do obviously test better in math and science, but they also test better in reading. And guess why? It's because they're actually engaged in their education. Instead of the sin of No Child Left Behind is these teaching these discrete little skills that end up on the test to the point that it's just boring. It's boring for the teachers, it's boring for the students. And STEM, when I was in Montemita, I was watching kids who are really, really engaged in their education. But STEM is absolutely necessary, and that's exactly where our emphasis was after Sputnik was launched.
Here's a question I think I'll direct to Mr. Roman and to the Senator is the 3M is working on materials related to electricity as well as to biofuels. So one of the audience wanted to know, what about electricity for transportation? Are we paying attention to that in federal policy? What are companies doing with respect to that?
I just didn't comment on 3M. We've been focusing on a number of areas around storage technologies and energy generation technologies like fuel cell that have application into transportation. And certainly kind of the indirect with the renewable energy focus is the electrification potential of the opportunity for renewable related to that. But I think we have many different business models, but a lot of what we're doing renewable is materials at this point, really focused on enabling the companies that are putting together what we would call the finished transportation or energy generation kinds of solutions.
Senator?
One thing in talking about my speech, I was talking a lot about renewables and couldn't cover everything. I think you're glad I didn't. But electric cars, I think, are really important, and it's one of the reasons we're going to be needing transmission. I think DARPA-E had a result of some of DARPA-E's financing has got us some of the battery technology in the Volt, right? ARPA-E it was based on DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is in the Defense Department, which created the Internet, happened to create the Internet, and other things as well. And ARPA-E is doing very high-risk, high-reward basic research, and there you see it in electric cars. The government, the federal government, has a lot of vehicles, and I think those should be a lot of those should be electric vehicles, and that means the need for electricity. And so part of our portfolio can come from all kinds of, we're talking about nuclear, we're talking about wind, we're talking about solar, and we're talking about storage, and but yes, it's I think needs to be a vital part of our transportation portfolio.
I know that the Senator has to leave at 3, but so I'm going to try to sneak in a couple more questions really quickly.
We got plenty of time.
So one of the challenges with biofuels is the concern about the tight balance between, say, carbon in and carbon out, and the notion of next generation biofuels. So, Dean Eldey, maybe you could identify one of the things that you see coming up in the biofuels area that seems most promising, and I think Senator Franken might have heard some of those ideas. Maybe he can respond briefly about the notion of next generation biofuels that might correct some of the concerns that people have.
Well, the next generation that's taken longer than most people thought it would take has been cellulosic ethanol. That is to use the biomass directly and harvest the fermentable sugars. And, that is, as Senator Franken said, really coming along. I mean, it's going to be realized. It's very close. And I think what we see is not only that as the next generation, but we're also seeing other types of fuel. Butanol is starting to come on very interestingly here in Minnesota, down in Laverne, with GEVO. That will be a very interesting next-generation fuel product. And then I think we're seeing things like the work of Larry Wackett and others about creating engineering organisms just for the purpose of creating hydrocarbons that are useful for fuel. So I think we're going to see not only a second generation, but a third is not far behind. And that's where innovation can just drive one generation after another. And let's bring them on sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, the technologies I heard about today were Larry's, which is how do they do that? They put
2 different microbes into a latex film, and one microbe harvests the photons and passes on some nutrients to the next one, which in turn spits out the fuel.
yeah, that. And but I heard about a couple others that were pretty revolutionary, or would be revolutionary. I was up at, I mentioned this in the speech at Isanti at Evercat. I don't know if you know that process, but that seems like an amazing process.
It is.
And, that is basically taking alcohol and oil, and the oil that they use is inedible oil. So part of maybe I thought where your question was going was the food fuel question, but they're talking about inedible feedstocks for this, and the system, it just goes through a catalyst, and it was developed by these scientists from the U in Augsburg, and it creates biofuels instantly. I mean, it just doesn't take time. It just goes through this tube reactor flatbed thing. And it goes through, and there's a catalyst, but the catalyst doesn't even get used. It's just a catalyst. It catalyzes the reaction or something, and it turns into the biofuel, biodiesel, and alcohol, which gets recycled to be used again with the seeds, the oil. And the oil is coming from this non-edible. What kind of seeds? Al junkie? Camellia.
Camellia.
Well, anyway, so these non-edible seeds which grow in lousy soil, and this is really and it doesn't use any water at all. In fact, it produces a little bit of water, which they got to get out of it, and it's the old cliche. There's no silver bullet, just silver buckshot, and the buckshot is coming flying at us, and we just got to catch it.
So,
Wow, I had nowhere to go there. I just had no place to go.
So, Commissioner, I'm going to come back to you in the center with this final question. And I know you wanted to throw something in there, so maybe you can combine it. Regrettably, the climate change debate has become polarized politically. A recent Pew poll identified the fact that 70% of Republicans question whether climate change is happening, 70% of Democrats think it is. But the senator made an effort, I think, in his talk to identify the reasons for thinking about renewable energy beyond the climate change debate. And Commissioner, maybe if you could comment on the economic reasons for being interested in renewable energy, and then I think we'll give it back to Senator Franken for a little summation.
Well, I think everybody here has made the case that it's just good business sense. What I was going to interject before was that if you recall Minnesota's history, how we've taken the medical device industry, back when that was beginning in the 60s and 70s, and there was early stage money in Minnesota, there was research and development money in Minnesota, the university was heavily invested, the state invested in higher education, and we had the people. And all this happened. It's taken us through a generation or more and really grown. I think the future in bioscience, life science, and green energy and thing has the same potential to take Minnesota through multiple generations. But there's some key elements. We're disinvesting in higher ed and, again, in workforce development. So if we don't have the workforce, these jobs are going to go where the workforce is. And we see this over and over again. So I can't stress enough. Representative Tim Mahoney's here, and I just looked up and saw him, and he's been struggling to get funding for our Science and Technology Authority at the state, which is a separate authority. It lives kind of under my department. It's been created but never really funded, so they can provide research, grants, and encouragement for young entrepreneurs. And that's where, it comes out of the university. How is it commercialized? We don't want it commercialized in California and Boston. We want it commercialized here in Minnesota. So tell your legislators you need to invest in these things. Higher ed, Science and Technology Authority, research money. Now, Governor Dayton has proposed to upped the research proposal from 5 to 10%, the research and development tax write-off. He's proposing now to up that to 15% to try to get companies to put money into research and development in Minnesota. So,
I couldn't agree more, especially on biosciences. We really, there's no reason, considering the research we do here at the U, at Mayo, in partnership between the U and Mayo, that we should not have a biotech industry in this state that is on a par with our medical device industry. And that's really, I think, one of my jobs is to try to facilitate that. As far as polarization politically, I haven't really noticed that at all. I think I gotta go.
These events wouldn't be possible without the help of the Center for Science, Technology, and Public Policy staff, Sophia Guinness and Leah Wilkes. We really appreciate Senator Franken and all our panel members. And thank you all for being here. We're good.
Mike Gus is a big fan of yours.
Well, and Rod Larkin mentioned that you were interested, so thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. Really great.
I think it's sort of like adjacent hospital adaptation stuff.